Good evening and welcome to Vital Perspectives. I'm your host, Dr. Marwin Spiller, and our guest today is Pam Adams, who is a reporter for the Peoria Journal-Star and a native of Peoria. Today, our conversation is race, inequality, and the media. Pam is going to talk to us today about several news stories and how the media has played a role in shaping how we think about those stories, how we think about race, how we think about inequality generally, as well as some of the more local issues that have happened here in Peoria over the last couple of months. So I want to start out with a very broad sort of question that almost 8 years since President Obama was elected into office, it started with a lot of optimism that the racial climate has changed. But we know that over the last couple of years, there's been a number of flashpoints around the country that suggest that that optimism has faded, and whether or not that was even real or not, given the controversies that has happened. And we're now having, again, a deep conversation about race and inequality. And I want to know, from your perspective, how have the media sort of shaped that conversation?
First, are you referring to that whole idea of a post-racial America after his election?
Yes.
And I don't know if anybody ever bought into that. I don't know where that came from. I am told that, that came about from some national columnist. But
so you was never sold that we were post-racial?
no, and most things that I read, or most black people that I talked to, weren't sold on a post-racial. I think there was a celebration that finally, after, 200 or so years, there was indeed a black president. But I don't think anybody ever thought it was the end-all be-all, particularly when you looked at a lot of the things that came up during the campaign. Whether it was Bill Clinton's cynical use of race or whether it was the whole birther issue. All of those things simply kind of exploded. I think I wrote a column at the time that took more of a we'll wait and see attitude. Because the flip side of that is Obama may well have been the first black president, but he was still the president of the United States. And that wasn't automatically going to change this country or change its change its history. And because of that, I think there are some things that him being president, he doesn't get a pass on. He still deserves a critique, although albeit a fair critique, but we still have to critique him as the president.
Okay, so you're not surprised by the recent turn? I mean, whether it's the police shootings, whether it's the rise of Black Lives Matter, whether it's the rise of Donald Trump and some of his incendiary rhetoric, it wasn't necessarily that optimism. His election didn't necessarily suggest a change in American race relations.
Well, if you know anything about American race relations, you know there's always going to be a backlash. Always going to be a backlash. And so part of what we're seeing, I suspect, has to do with the backlash to Obama. You have to question why at this moment would someone like a Trump beat out all of the other Republican potential nominees. So, and that's part of a broader backlash, I would guess, that has its roots in our history. I mean, after after the Civil War, you had Reconstruction, and then you had the rise of Jim Crow segregation. After the Civil Rights Movement, you had the backlash to the Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah.
I mean, this is nothing.
Yeah,
This is nothing new.
You had Reagan.
Yeah.
Economics.
And yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. This is nothing new.
Yeah.
You know, so I would characterize it as you do 3 steps forward and then you take a step back. You know, but you still got those 2 steps.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you do 3 more steps forward.
Yeah.
And then there's a step back. So you know,
Yeah.
I'm still hopeful.
Yeah.
But it's applied.
So it feeds into a narrative of the Pew Research Center and their findings that many black Americans are skeptical that the country will eventually make the changes necessary for racial equality. That seems to fit into this narrative.
I'm not skeptical. I think the country will. I mean, when when Obama was elected, so you had so many people say, I never thought I'd see it happen. But even King said in the 60s, I think in about 40 years, we'll have a black president. And it took about 10 years longer, I think, but he was right. And I still have that optimism that, yeah, we're constantly moving forward.
Yeah.
You know, it plods sometimes, but we are. So I'm not skeptical. I believe that
change is
there's,
coming.
yeah, there's steady progress.
Right.
It's just not all of what we want as fast as what we want, but the progress does happen.
Yeah, and that brings into light the realities that you mentioned, King, in the '60s. We know that one of the watershed moments in the civil rights movement was when Dr. King and his organizers utilized the media to dramatize Bull O'Connor tactics, and that those images of dogs and water hoses sort of was shot across the country, terrified Americans who were unfamiliar with the ways of the South. How has the media sort of shaped our views today? Because you talk about our skepticism, whether or not there is or not, but a lot of that is our views, our perceptions. And do you think that the media is used or can be used in a way today that it was used then, or have things changed with social media that sort of you can't have the same impact?
Media is a broad word.
Okay.
During the civil rights movement, there were exactly 3 television stations and that everybody watched,
Right.
and your local newspaper and then the major newspapers. And you can point to city after city in the South where major demonstrations were not covered by their local newspapers. You've seen Southern newspapers apologize for that later on. But at the same time that maybe your local media was ignoring it, people were still seeing what was happening on the national news outlets. Fast forward to today, we in the local media may not be covering things as well, but we get forced to cover it by what's happening with social media. I mean, you can't grab hold of something. That's not what I meant to say. That is not what I meant to say.
Okay.
You can't not ignore some of the things that are coming across our Twitter feeds. Maybe we weren't going to cover some of these deaths of unarmed black men at the hands of police as they have been covered. but you can't ignore it. I mean, social media has played a huge role in what we're covering and how we're covering it, and how we're reacting to it.
Have the newsrooms changed in terms of how they think about these issues?
You know what? Newsrooms across the country, including this one, are just trying to keep their head above water because of many of the economic issues going on with newspapers right now. You know, cutbacks everywhere. Change how you cover things. At the same time, you know, we want to cover things on a variety of platforms. So we're all, whereas you had a reporter and photographer before, now you have, you want, and you ran a story in the paper. Now you want that story, you want to promote it on Twitter, you want a video, and you want your print story also. So we're all doing the same things at the same, you know, TV news. Before they just did video and a reporter with a reporter and they televised it. Now they're putting a story, writing a story and putting it online. So we're all doing the same things now across these multiple platforms. But we have far fewer staff than ever. Far fewer staff. So when you ask if the media is shaping things, if we are, it's almost by accident in a way, in a lot of ways, because there's not that kind of time to kind of sit back and say, let's explore this in depth. That said, though, we're still maintaining some of the old bad habits that that evolved even when we were at our heyday. And so you can say we're as responsible as anybody for, but not solely responsible for all of those perceptions about how black men, how black women, how poor people are portrayed and stereotyped. We do the same thing.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a break. Going to come back after the commercial to continue this conversation about race, inequality, and the media.
Gospel Peoria. Tune in Saturday nights at 7:30 on Comcast Cable Channel 22. Watch revealing positive information with various topics, people, and arts. Also, be sure to visit our Gospel Peoria TV Facebook and YouTube channel, where you can watch show segments, information, and updates about the program. That's Gospel Peoria TV on Comcast, Saturdays at 7:30 p.m., Channel 22. Now that's television with an innovative touch.
We're back, Vital Perspectives. I'm your host, Dr. Marwin Spiller, and our host today is Pam Adams of the Peoria Journal-Star. And before the break, we were talking about the role of the media in shaping our perceptions and attitudes about issues of race, inequality, and a number of other issues that have happened over the last several months in the country regarding those topics. And so I want to just to poll your thoughts on where we are with regard to the media. Have those cutbacks, that streamlining, has that meant you have more talented journalists in the newsroom? That, along with the increased diversity, I mean, have folks like Don Lennon, for example, and others, have that sort of led to better coverage of these issues? We have more talent, more diversity as a result of the natural shifts and changes in the media. Is that a fair assumption?
No, I think you're seeing talent in droves. I'm more familiar with print than television, so I think you're seeing talented people lead print in grows across the country. That also means the number of black reporters and other reporters of color are declining seriously in the country's newsrooms.
Yeah.
On the flip side, social media is, people are creating their own media. You know, people are pushing it forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
we in the media are very worried about where things are going right now because this is a time where there are more voices than ever, but there's also more noise than ever. And our role when we are at our best is to sift through the noise and bring some clarity to it. That costs money, you know, that takes time. That's, you know, it's rough. It can be rough. Yeah. So yeah, we're worried. We're worried about where things are going. So
Yeah, well nowhere is that appeared to be more evident. It's the coverage of Black Lives Matter. I mean, Black Lives Matter started down in Missouri, came out of the whole Ferguson and the death of Mike Brown.
Trayvon.
Yes,
Martin.
Trayvon Martin. And given all the stuff that have come after Trayvon and Ferguson, a lot of data suggests that a lot of Americans either don't understand Black Lives Matter or sort of have a negative perception of Black Lives Matter. Again, I come back to the question, is it the media and their coverage of Black Lives Matter? Have they done due diligence in their coverage of the movement? They've been fair?
First, let me say, it is absolutely heartbreaking that something like as simple as Black Lives Matter would take hold like it has in a 2016. You know, that young people felt the need to make that point, and that it was absolutely necessary to make that point. It's heartbreaking. And it is really just a very simple statement, prompted by social media, and it took off. On the flip side, once again, if you know anything about the history of this country, you knew there was going to be a backlash to that. You know quite simply that people are going to say, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't include me. Well, no, you know, no, that's not it. That's not it. One of the powerful things about Black Lives Matter and what it has spawned is that people have been able to cover it for themselves using social media. Now, that has been good in one sense for the media because it helps us get out there in the street and follow their Twitter feeds and helps us know where to go also. If we want to take advantage of this. I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm kind of like the least techie person in the world. But so that's been a good thing. That's been a good thing. The other good thing is it kind of forces us to cover these things that might not have been covered or might not have been covered in certain ways. So that's not a bad thing in itself. Have we in the media explored it as much as we could? And I come from two angles on that. It appears to be such a fluid movement, such a network, that those kinds of things are more difficult to cover. You know, in the past when you had the kind of charismatic leader kind of set up, you know, you went to oh, this is the president of the NAACP, and you go talk to him, and
Right.
and here's your spokesman, or here's the leading black pastor, and you talk to him, and which is, you know,
It's easy to cover.
easier to cover, maybe not the best way to cover, but you know, given a day, okay, that's what we do. Black Lives Matter is far more fluid, and that's not a bad thing, but it's a little more challenging to cover. Not a bad thing. It keeps us on our toes. So,
And you used the word or the phrase forced to cover. And again, I'm thinking that perhaps if there were young people in the newsroom, young, talented African Americans, Latinos, gay and lesbian reporters, that those would be stories, those would be issues that they would sort of gravitate to. So it wouldn't have to force them to take on those issues.
What I mean is this. Now, we had an incident in this city recently where a city councilman went to Twitter, you know, basically saying she didn't agree with Black Lives Matter. And this was a story for a couple of days, and the newspaper hadn't covered it in those early on. You know, because I'm someone that's out and about, I was taking some hits, you know, why isn't your newspaper covering this? It's like, here you go. But once it kept moving forward, you know, and this council person, Beth Akerson, held a press conference, then it was covered. So that's what I'm saying. Sometimes things have their own momentum where, for whatever reasons, if you hadn't planned to cover it, it got covered. There is but can we do better of looking at the issues that spawned this? Absolutely. Have we been trying? I can say there have been some attempts. It is much harder, going back to what I said earlier about the cutbacks in newsrooms. Even if we were better at doing it, now it's much harder to get at the structural kinds of inequalities and the structural kinds of racism that propel this. And I think so what we end up doing is we cover the surface racism. Somebody called somebody the N-word, or somebody called, you know, somebody did something bad one way or the other. Those are the easy gets. Somebody had graffiti on, you know, nasty racist graffiti on the wall. We can do that. But the kinds of structural inequalities that take a deep dive investigative reporting are much harder. And
Is that because limited staff, or?
Yeah, there's limited staff. It takes, you know, it takes time. It takes numbers. I mean, it takes dollars. Yeah, and right now, I don't know if you're familiar with it. There was this 24/7 report about that listed Peoria as one of the 10 worst places.
I think it was 6. Yeah, it was number
top. Yeah, was it in the state to live? Yeah, in the state. And so the Journal Star has kind of been looking at a lot of the issues that brought up, but even within those, you know, and so doing pretty much stories monthly that look at those. But even in doing those, where what we've mainly done, I think, is kind of explore the numbers and explore them from, you know, the perspective of black people. But there's far deeper dives to get into all of it.
Yeah.
How do we get to this point?
Yeah.
Ghettos don't just happen.
Right.
All black, all poor schools don't just happen.
Yeah.
And so the dive that it takes to get into that
Yeah, and I wonder.
is more difficult.
And I wonder how much social media has played into sort of limiting people's attention span to really follow that deep dive. I mean, you have to follow an argument and a story. I mean,
Well, social media can work both ways. It can limit the attention span, but then it can also broaden it. It can push it out there. I think one of the marvelous pieces to look at that's come out in this age of no attention span was Ta-Nehisi Coates' piece on the case for reparations in The Atlantic.
Yeah, so
Now,
it's good
yeah. And that took, as I say, a really deep dive into, how things happened as far as housing goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was spurred by social media. So.
Wow. I mean, we just scratched the surface, speaking of those deep dives. So unfortunately, we are out of time. But it's been wonderful to talk to you, and thank you for tuning in to Vital Perspectives. And our host, Pam Adams, the Journal Star. Until next time,